Progression is not about being brave or disciplined enough. It's about reading signals. Some people fall into the trap of thinking that if they just do more, they'll get better faster. Are you ready to get back to what you love after knee replacement? The Total Knee Success Podcast is your trusted guide with practical tips, evidence-based strategies, and no fluff. It's not personal medical advice, just solid education to help you manage pain, regain mobility, and get back to living the life you love. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Total Knee Success Podcast. If episode 41 helped you understand what your walking speed reflects about recovery, then this episode is about what to do with that information. Early on, recovery is often defined by pain. Later, what many people struggle with most is knowing how to move forward once they're already walking. You're walking, you're trying to be consistent, but you're not sure when to do more, when to hold steady, or when walking more isn't the right lever at all. By the end of this episode, you'll move from uncertainty to clarity about how to decide when to progress your walking, so you're no longer waiting for reassurance or reacting out of fear. And before we go further, it's worth being clear about this. Decisions about how much to walk, when to progress, and when to hold steady should always be discussed with your physical therapist, who can help you apply these principles to your specific surgery timeline and medical history. Most people are told some version of just keep walking. That advice is well-intentioned, but it's also not particularly useful. Even with that support, the advice to simply keep walking is incomplete. Walking is not a single behavior. Distance, pace, terrain, support, and rest all change what walking asks of your system. Without guidance on how to interpret your body's response, it's easy to either hold back longer than needed or push forward without understanding how you're going to respond to that increase in demand. Progression is not about being brave or disciplined enough. It's about reading signals. Some people fall into the trap of thinking that if they just do more, they'll get better faster, when in reality, they're slowly wearing themselves out and blunting the very adaptations they're trying to build. Your body is already giving you information every time you walk. What often gets in the way is that people aren't always taught which signals are most useful to pay attention to. Let's start with the most common one: pain during the walk. Pain during movement gets all the attention, but it's not always the most useful signal for deciding progression. Mild discomfort while walking does not automatically mean harm, especially in the subacute and later phases of recovery. More severe pain, of course, sharp or catching pain, or pain that feels alarming or unfamiliar, can signal that something needs to be modified, so definitely pay attention to that. Early after surgery, pain is more protective and deserves closer attention. As recovery progresses past the first several weeks, stiffness or achiness that improves as you continue walking often reflects tissues warming up and adapting rather than injury. Context shapes how that sensation should be interpreted, and the same experience can mean different things depending on where you are in recovery. You might not get enough feedback from your body during your walk. It's what happens later that really makes a difference, how your knee responds that evening, how it feels the next morning. If symptoms settle back to baseline within a reasonable window, that's often a sign that the load was tolerated and it may have been appropriate. This is one reason clinicians pay attention to recovery patterns more often than just single moments. A knee that feels challenged but stable and then returns to its usual state is communicating something very different from a knee that becomes progressively more swollen, stiff, or guarded for days. It's not about just pushing through when things are becoming progressively worse. It's about listening to your body and giving it a pause. Stiffness and fatigue can feel familiar, but they usually point in different directions. Stiffness that eases as you keep moving often reflects tissues warming up, while fatigue that builds and begins to change how you move is more likely signaling the need to pause progression or adjust how you're approaching walking. Fatigue after walking is not inherently negative. Early in recovery, walking requires more effort because strength, coordination, and efficiency are still rebuilding. The key signal is the pattern over time. Fatigue that resolves with rest is very different from fatigue that carries over and begins to alter how you move on later walks. When you notice that shift, it's a cue to pause progression rather than push through it. Often, the most useful response is to keep walking volume steady for a short period, support recovery between walks, or redirect some effort towards strength or balance so walking can progress again with better support later on. Walking speed trends are another underused signal. In episode 41, we talked about typical ranges in meters per second and what they often reflect. Go ahead and check back in episode 41 if you haven't listened to it yet and you're interested in that information. Now here's how to use that information practically. Single days don't tell you much. Trends do. If you're measuring your pace and your pace gradually becomes easier to maintain, even if that isn't very fast yet, that's a green light. If your pace feels increasingly effortful at the same distances, then that suggests something needs support before adding more. Maybe you need some rest. Maybe you need to strengthen a little bit more. And this is where some people get stuck emotionally. They assume that feeling slow means they should either push harder or pull back completely. And neither response is usually required. Sometimes the most productive choice is to keep the distance the same and add support elsewhere, like strength or balance work, so walking can progress later. Endurance is another key signal. Before increasing pace or terrain, most people benefit from having a stable distance they can tolerate without a significant next day setback. Endurance creates a foundation. When distance tolerance becomes predictable, might be time to try speeding up your walk slightly, as long as you're still walking with a very smooth and symmetrical pattern, then that may be appropriate. This is where having a simple walking structure can help. For some people, that looks like walking the same distance most days of the week and adding a small amount, 5 to 10%, not more than that, only after the distance feels comfortable. For others, it means alternating shorter, easier walks with slightly longer ones, rather than increasing every day. Some people do best with time-based walks, such as 10 to 15 minutes at a comfortable pace, gradually extending the time before worrying about speed. And these are not rules. These are just examples of how people can organize walking so progression is intentional rather than reactive. It's a good idea to increase one parameter at a time and see how that feels for you. So rather than increasing your speed and your distance in one particular walk, it's better to increase your speed without increasing the distance on one walk, or increase your distance and keep your speed the same on that walk. Assistive devices fit into this conversation more than most people expect. Using a cane or a walker is often interpreted as a failure to progress. In reality, devices are tools for progression. They reduce the load on the system just enough to allow better movement quality, longer exposure potentially, or safer practice. Many clinicians see smoother progress when devices are used strategically rather than abandoned early. We'd much rather see you continue walking with that cane a little longer if your gait pattern is smoother and you're practicing a more symmetrical motion for longer distances. A common pattern is this: someone walks without a device, but at a very cautious pace with compensations. With a device, they move more fluidly and confidently, and that improved pattern can support strength and coordination gains that eventually make the device unnecessary. The device didn't delay progress, it actually enabled it in a case like that. If you're looking for some popular canes and walkers, I have some links in the show notes, so go ahead and check that out if you'd like. Confidence is another signal that deserves attention. Confidence is not the absence of awareness, it's the sense that you can manage what happens if something changes or feels a bit off. When your confidence grows, walking usually becomes less guarded. That often shows up as smoother turns, less hesitation, and a more consistent pacing. It's also important to recognize when walking is not the main limiter. If walking speed and tolerance stall, despite consistent effort, it often means walking is not the most effective stimulus. Maybe you need to work on some strengthening, particularly in the quadriceps in the front of the thigh. Frequently, that can become the bottleneck. Balance and coordination can also limit progression, especially on uneven surfaces or with direction changes. Consult your physical therapist if you want to progress uneven surfaces, direction changes, significant balance, or strength work. Progression decisions become clearer when you ask better questions. Instead of, should I walk more, try, what is my walking showing me that I need right now? Sometimes the answer is more distance. Sometimes it's more rest. Sometimes it's a different kind of work altogether. Agency does not mean doing more for the sake of doing more. It means you making choices based on signals rather than assumptions. When you understand what your body is communicating, progression stops feeling like a gamble. There's also a timing component that sometimes gets overlooked. Recovery capacity changes over the weeks and the months. What felt like too much at one point can become perfectly appropriate later, without any dramatic change in your routine. As you listen to this episode, I want you to notice which signals you've been prioritizing and which ones you may have been ignoring. Many people were never taught to look at recovery patterns, trends, or confidence. They might just be looking at pain, and they might be feeling like everything's dictated by their pain. Once you start paying attention to other factors besides the pain, decisions can get easier. Some people find it helpful to jot down brief notes about how their knee responds to walking, how it feels later that day or on the next morning, especially if keeping a simple journal is a system that works for them. If you're preparing for knee replacement and want a clear, grounded way to use the weeks before surgery to set yourself up for a smoother recovery, my upcoming book, The Knee Replacement Game Plan, walks you through exactly how to do that. It focuses on what to work on and what to avoid, and how to go into surgery feeling informed rather than overwhelmed. It's evidence-based education, not medical advice. You can click the link in the show notes to get notified when the book is released. Before we wrap up, just remember that everything we talk about here is for education only. I don't know you personally, and I can't see how your knee is responding day to day. So it's always important to follow the plan your surgeon and healthcare team have set for you. And talk with your physical therapist about what applies to your specific situation for progressing your walking. If you're currently looking for a cane or walker, I've included links in the show notes to some popular options that many people find helpful. And if you found this episode helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the show and maybe even share it with a friend or family member who's getting ready for a knee replacement. That's one of the best ways to help this information reach the people who need it. In the next episode, we'll step back and look at the bigger physiological picture. What's actually healing at different points after surgery, and why timelines based on tissue recovery can reduce a lot of unnecessary worry. Thanks for joining me. I'm Michelle, and this has been the Total Knee Success Podcast. This podcast is for educational purposes only. Discover more at totalkneesuccess.com, and be sure to subscribe and share, because every step forward takes you closer to living the life you love.